Revenge films.
My name is Julia Roberts. I'm 32. I live with my husband, who's 5 years older than me, and my daughter Amy, who's 5 years old, April of last year. Our family had to move from Mississippi to New York due to my husband's work. We had to move into a company-owned apartment, and I had to start looking for Amy's new kindergarten. Because I grew up in the suburbs, I always dreamed of living in the city. But now, with a daughter, I'm kind of scared of New York, to be honest. Do school entry problems and trouble between other parents from school really exist like they do in TV shows? To think that they exist. What would I do if Amy or I got bullied? I thought about all that, and so I had to find Amy a very good kindergarten. At first, Amy was crying that she didn't want to change schools. But after she actually did, I hear she was getting along very well with the others. And one day, when I went to pick her up from school... Nice to meet you, Amy's mom. It was Sonia Brown's mother, a girl that was in the same class as Amy. Nice to meet you too. You must be Sonia's mother, right? I hear they get along very well. Yes. I hear Sonia enjoys Amy's presence too. Hey, so you live in that company apartment, right? We live very close to the apartment, and we saw you guys go back home there. She told me they lived right in front of our apartment. And we also knew of her house as well, ever since we moved. Wow, what a beautiful house, huh?
Yeah, I can't afford this with my salary.
I told her that conversation to her, and she replied, "Don't say that. We bought it for very cheap." She laughed. After this encounter, she would talk to me a lot about the neighborhood, such as, "That cafe over there is kid-friendly. The park over there has a better playground," she informed me. And because of her, I was able to get along with the other mothers in the neighborhood as well. And I learned she was at the top of the cast. And when I realized that I was already a part of what I was afraid of, the school-parent relationship. I didn't want to be a part of the caste problem, but I didn't mind Mrs. Brown's friendly attitude. And because I loved the company of the other mothers, I decided to stick around. One day, while on my way to pick up Amy with another mother, Mrs. Cooper, who was walking by, smacked me with her umbrella. I was knocked down to the ground from the force, and my face had started to bleed. "Mrs. Roberts!" The other mothers yelled in panic. Honestly, I was so shocked I couldn't move. "You're bleeding. We need to get you to the hospital," the other mothers continued. But Mrs. Cooper came and confronted us.
"You're still so new here! Why am I struggling like this, while a newcomer like you is enjoying your life?"
She started to scream. She would not calm down. So the security guard had to take her down to the police station. Luckily, the umbrella didn't go too deep, so my cut was very small. My face was bruised up, so Amy came and said,
"I'm the nurse. Here you go."
and put a big bandage on my face. That night, Mrs. Cooper's parents, who happened to live with her at the time, came to our house. According to her husband, Mrs. Cooper had faced continuous harassment from Mrs. Brown and the rest of the mothers. "You live in an apartment, right?" "I don't like my child talking to poor people. Could you please tell your child to keep away from mine?" She had faced harassment like this constantly, and at one point had to get medical help for depression. She likely thought she had crossed the line, so for about a year they had almost stopped harassing her. But once that Mrs. Cooper saw that we moved in, She thought that because we were newcomers, we would get harassed like her, and she checked up to help. But she saw that I was getting along with Mrs. Brown and the rest. She was saying this to her parents recently, and she likely attacked me from all the stress. When he ended the story, Mr. Cooper said,
"So please, could you not tell the police about this? I'll tell her what she did wrong."
I didn't plan to take this to the police, so I told him to please raise your head back up. My husband continued on to say,
"I understand that your wife was being harassed, and it was tough for her, and being depressed is not very fun. I understand she had gone through hell, but that has nothing to do with me or my wife. Did she harass her herself? Was she a part of her frustration? This was before we moved in, right? We could not have known what had happened before we moved here. I was going to let you and your wife off if my wife was not going to say something. But you never once apologized to my wife since we got here, right? You only talked about how your wife had it rough and how she was being harassed and how bad that was. I'm going to bring this to the police, whether my wife agrees or not."
The family gasped and started to say,
"We're very sorry. I'm so sorry."
but my husband continued on.
"Those words are not for my wife, but for me not to go to the police, right?"
They sat there awkwardly, and they left. My husband persuaded me about going to the police, and so we decided to go. We filed a police report for the wife, and my husband decided to move Amy's kindergarten again. Mrs. Brown was kind to me. I got along with the other mothers, and Amy seemed to finally fit into the school, so I didn't want her to change schools again. But my husband said,
"I can see that Miss Brown has learned her lesson, but she was the reason why Miss Cooper had gotten depressed. That fact will remain the same. No one changes their character that quickly. And besides, people like her will continue to harass one person by making a group of allies. There is a chance that the target will be you next."
He said this will be for me and for Amy. And what he said was right. Because we filed a police report about Mrs. Cooper, what Mrs. Brown had done to her became public knowledge. Because of this, the other mothers had gotten together to blame everything on Mrs. Brown alone. They tried to harass her into quitting the school because they were afraid they'd ruin her reputation. Because of this, even the bully Mrs. Brown had been dethroned from her caste and had to quit the school entirely. I don't want to think about what would have happened if I had stayed there. We moved Amy to a new kindergarten where they don't care about grades, and the principal said that she would rather have the kids learn from playing around. Amy seems to love the new kindergarten.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.